Welcome back to Tops. On this channel, we don't chase trends. We study how value changes, slowly, quietly, and often against what people once believed. Most gemstones don't become valuable the moment they're discovered. Some are ignored, some are mispriced, some are misunderstood for decades. Not because they're fake, not because they're common, but because the market didn't yet know what it was looking at. Time didn't change these stones. Understanding did. In today's episode, we're counting down 10 gemstones that only became valuable after time passed. Not through hype, not through marketing, but through correction. Before we begin, one quick question. Which gemstone do you think ends up at number 1? Just the name. And stay with us because the stone at number 1 isn't valued for beauty, tradition, or status. It's valued because once it was gone, there was no replacing it. Let's begin with number 10. Ranked 10th, Peridot, the stone America didn't take seriously until time forced a rethink. Peridot was never rare. That's exactly why no one took it seriously. In a market trained to equate value with scarcity, Peridot's visibility became its greatest disadvantage. It wasn't hidden, it wasn't rare to see, and it certainly wasn't treated as something worth waiting for. In the American market, Peridot became associated with casual jewelry, pieces bought on vacation, worn in summer, and forgotten just as quickly. It was bright, friendly, and affordable, and that combination quietly pushed it out of serious conversations about long-term value. Collectors overlooked it. Jewelers treated it as secondary. Buyers assumed its limits were already understood. Peridot didn't fail because it lacked beauty. It failed because it arrived too early for the way value was measured at the time. Geologically, Peridot is the gem-quality form of olivine, a mineral that forms deep within the Earth's mantle. Unlike most gemstones that crystallize closer to the surface, Peridot rises from extreme depths through volcanic activity. In rare instances, it has even been found in meteorites, making it one of the few gemstones linked to material formed beyond Earth itself. For years, none of that mattered. Peridot was sold almost entirely on color. Clean green, fresh, seasonal. No emphasis on formation, no emphasis on rarity within quality grades. No distinction between ordinary stones and truly fine material. And because the market treated all Peridot as interchangeable, it assumed supply was endless. Time slowly proved otherwise. As gemological standards improved, a quiet separation emerged. Collectors began to recognize that Peridot, with strong saturation, minimal brown tones, and high clarity, came from a far narrower range of sources than previously believed. Older mining regions declined. High-quality material became harder to replace. Peridot didn't disappear, but good Peridot did. At the same time, American buying behavior changed. Over time, buyers became less focused on status and more interested in origin, formation, and honesty of material. Stones that relied on storytelling rather than marketing began to gain attention. Peridot fit that shift, not because it changed, but because perception did. Quick question before we continue. Which gemstone do you think America misunderstood the longest? Peridot or another stone you've seen overlooked for years? Just the name is enough. Peridot's value never arrived suddenly. There was no trend cycle, no speculative rush, no moment when prices exploded. Instead, it moved gradually, from novelty to reconsideration to quiet respect. Today, Peridot occupies a different position in the American market. It's no longer chosen impulsively. Collectors evaluate it carefully. Jewelers source it selectively. Buyers understand that not all Peridot is equal, and that quality matters more than color alone. What makes Peridot important in this ranking is not how much it's worth now. It's how long it took to be understood. For decades, it sat dismissed not because it lacked value, but because the market didn't yet have the language to describe why it mattered. Time didn't make Peridot rare. Time made people patient enough to see it clearly, and that's why Peridot belongs here. Not as a stone that followed demand, but as one that waited for understanding to catch up. Which gemstone do you think gained respect later than it deserved? Peridot or another stone? Just comment the name. I read everyone. Ranked 9th, Moonstone, the gem. America thought it understood until time changed the definition. What happens when a gemstone is beautiful, but too familiar to question? Moonstone didn't disappear into obscurity. It stayed visible long enough for people to stop examining it. In the American market, Moonstone lived on the edges of fine jewelry. It appeared in vintage designs, artisan collections, and occasional bohemian pieces. Admired for its soft glow, but rarely evaluated for long-term value. It was seen as aesthetic, not essential. Collectors admired it casually. Jewelers used it sparingly. Buyers assumed its role was purely decorative. Moonstone didn't suffer from invisibility. It suffered from overfamiliarity. Geologically, Moonstone is a variety of feldspar, and its defining feature, adulorescence, is not a surface effect. It's the result of light scattering between microscopic layers within the crystal. That internal structure creates a floating sheen that shifts as the stone moves, a phenomenon that cannot be replicated synthetically with consistency. For decades, that complexity was ignored. Moonstone was sold by appearance alone. Soft white, gentle blue glow. Romantic associations. Little attention was paid to origin, structure, or stability. In the American market especially, Moonstone was often grouped with other decorative stones and treated as interchangeable. Time slowly separated what looked similar from what actually was. As gemological understanding deepened, collectors began to recognize that not all moonstone behaves the same. Stones with sharp centered adulorescence, strong transparency, and durable structure came from increasingly specific sources, particularly older Sri Lankan deposits that were no longer producing in volume. Moonstone didn't vanish, but fine moonstone became difficult to replace. At the same time, cultural perception shifted. American buyers began re-evaluating stones that expressed restraint rather than dominance. Loud brilliance gave way to subtle movement. Visual calm began to matter more than immediate impact. Moonstone fit that transition quietly. It wasn't marketed aggressively. It didn't compete with diamonds. It didn't demand attention. Instead, it waited. Pause for a moment. When you first encountered Moonstone, did you see it as a serious gemstone or just a beautiful accent? Comment with one word: serious or decorative. Moonstone's rise was not driven by speculation. There was no sudden spike, no moment when it became fashionable overnight. Its value emerged gradually as collectors learned to distinguish quality from imitation, structure from surface, origin from appearance. What once felt soft began to feel precise. What once felt common began to feel selective. Today, Moonstone occupies a distinct position in the American gemstone landscape. It's no longer chosen simply for its glow. It's chosen for its internal order, its restrained movement, and the patience required to understand it. High-quality moonstone is evaluated carefully, sourced intentionally, and appreciated for what it does quietly rather than loudly. Moonstone belongs in this ranking because its value didn't arrive with discovery. It arrived with discernment. For decades it was seen, but it wasn't examined. Time didn't change Moonstone's appearance. Time changed the way people learned to look at it. And once that happened, Moonstone stopped being an accent and became a choice. Did you originally see Moonstone as decorative or serious? Just one word is enough. Ranked 8th. Turquoise. The stone. America used too early to recognize too late. Walk into a roadside shop anywhere in the American Southwest, and you'll find turquoise everywhere. That ubiquity didn't elevate its value. It diluted it. Its color was unmistakable. Its presence was constant. And over time, that familiarity quietly worked against it. In the American market, turquoise became associated with decoration rather than evaluation. It was worn, gifted, and collected casually, often without questions about origin, treatment, or structure. The stone's cultural weight was visible, but its material value was rarely examined. Collectors overlooked it. Jewelers standardized it. Buyers assumed they already knew what turquoise was worth. Turquoise didn't lose value because it lacked significance. It lost value because it was used before it was understood. Geologically, turquoise is a hydrous phosphate mineral formed through a slow interaction between copper-rich solutions and aluminum-bearing rocks. Unlike many gemstones that crystallize in dramatic forms, turquoise forms quietly, often filling fractures over long periods. Natural, untreated turquoise with stable color and fine structure is far rarer than its widespread image suggests. For decades, that distinction was ignored. As demand grew, the market adapted, not by slowing down, but by accelerating production. Stabilized turquoise, dyed material, and composite stones flooded the market. Visual similarity replaced geological truth, and in the process, natural turquoise became harder to identify and easier to dismiss. Everything looked the same, so everything was priced the same. Time changed that equation. As older American and Middle Eastern mines declined or closed, high-quality natural turquoise became increasingly difficult to source. At the same time, gemological education began to separate treated material from untreated stone. Collectors learned to identify matrix patterns, color stability, and origin-specific characteristics. What once felt common began to feel finite. At the cultural level, perception shifted as well. American buyers began reassessing materials that had been commercialized too quickly. Authenticity regained importance. Provenance mattered. Stones with clear origin and minimal intervention gained quiet respect. Turquoise, once diluted by overuse, began to recover its identity. Quick pause. Have you ever owned a piece of turquoise and wondered later whether it was natural or treated? Just answer yes or no in the comments. Turquoise's value did not return through trend cycles or fashion revivals. It returned through correction. As the market learned to distinguish between surface appearance and material integrity, true turquoise regained space, not as a souvenir, but as a stone requiring judgment. Today, turquoise occupies a careful position in the American gemstone landscape. It's no longer assumed. High-quality pieces are evaluated individually. Natural stones are documented. Buyers understand that most turquoise is not equal, and never was. What places turquoise in this ranking is not its history of use, but its history of misunderstanding. For generations, it was worn without being questioned. Only after time reduced supply and increased knowledge did its true boundaries become visible. Turquoise did not become valuable because people wanted it again. It became valuable because people learned how to see it. And once that happened, turquoise stopped being something America wore casually and became something it chose deliberately. Have you ever wondered whether a turquoise piece you owned was natural or treated? Just comment yes or no. Ranked 7th. Opal, the stone. America learned to trust only after time slowed it down. Opal is one of the few gemstones people were once warned not to buy. Not because it wasn't beautiful, but because no one trusted it to behave. Opal was beautiful and unpredictable. It shimmered with color unlike any other gemstone, yet it earned a reputation for being fragile, temperamental, and risky. In the American market, that reputation followed it for decades. Collectors hesitated, jewelers cautioned, buyers admired from a distance. Opal wasn't dismissed because it lacked appeal. It was avoided because it didn't inspire confidence. Geologically, opal is not a crystal in the traditional sense. It's composed of microscopic spheres of silica arranged in patterns that diffract light, creating its characteristic play of color. That internal structure makes opal visually dynamic and historically difficult to predict. For years, that unpredictability defined its identity. Early opals, often poorly cut or improperly stored, reinforced the idea that the stone was unstable. Cracking, crazing, and color loss became cautionary tales passed from jeweler to buyer, and without reliable handling standards, opal's risks overshadowed its complexity. Time began to correct that perception. As cutting techniques improved and knowledge about hydration and stability expanded, opal changed, not physically but contextually. Australian discoveries, particularly from long-established fields, brought more consistent material to market. Structured grading systems separated stable opal from fragile examples. The stone itself hadn't become safer. The market had become more precise. At the same time, American collectors matured. Instead of expecting permanence through hardness alone, they began to appreciate stones that required understanding and care. Opal, once dismissed as unreliable, began to fit a new definition of value, one based on knowledge rather than fear. Opal didn't rush back into favor. it waited. Quick pause. Before watching this, did you associate opal more with beauty or with risk? Comment with one word. Beauty or risk? Opal's rise was not sudden. It didn't follow fashion cycles or celebrity trends. Its value returned gradually as buyers learned to distinguish between poor material and misunderstood structure. Stable opal, once overshadowed by caution, gained recognition for its durability when properly sourced and handled. What had been considered unpredictable began to feel intentional. What had been considered fragile began to feel nuanced. Today, opal holds a careful place in the American gemstone market. It is no longer universally avoided, but it is never chosen casually. High-quality opal is evaluated for pattern, color depth, stability, and origin. Buyers understand that opal demands attention, not fear. Opal earns its place in this ranking because its value was delayed by misunderstanding. For decades, it was judged by its failures rather than its potential. Only when time allowed knowledge to replace caution did opal's reputation begin to recover. Opal did not change its nature. Time changed the way people learned to work with it. And once that happened, opal stopped being a gamble and became a decision. When you think of opal, which comes to mind first, beauty or risk? Just one word is enough. Ranked 6th, Spinel, the stone history misnamed, and time had to correct. Some of the most famous rubies in history were never rubies at all. They were Spinel, hiding in plain sight under someone else's name. It sat in crowns. It rested in royal collections. It carried prestige without recognition, and almost no one knew what it truly was. In the American market, Spinel arrived with a quiet disadvantage. By the time modern buyers encountered it, its story had already been written and erased by history. Spinel wasn't ignored because it lacked beauty. It was ignored because it had been misidentified for too long. Geologically, Spinel is a distinct mineral with its own crystal structure and durability. It forms under conditions different from ruby and sapphire, yet shares similar color intensity and clarity. For generations, that similarity caused confusion rather than admiration. Red Spinel was called ruby. Blue Spinel was grouped with sapphire. Spinel itself went unnamed. For centuries, some of the world's most famous rubies were actually Spinel. But once gemology matured and those mistakes were corrected, Spinel didn't immediately gain status. Instead, it faced a different problem. It no longer belonged to the stories people already valued. Correction doesn't always bring recognition. Sometimes it brings silence. In the 20th century, as American jewelry markets became more standardized, Spinel was categorized as secondary. It wasn't part of the traditional luxury narrative. It lacked a marketing identity. It didn't fit neatly into existing price hierarchies. Collectors passed it over. Jewelers rarely highlighted it. Buyers assumed it was a substitute rather than a choice. Spinel wasn't rejected. It was unclaimed. Time slowly changed that. As gemological education expanded, Spinel's properties became impossible to ignore. High hardness, excellent clarity, color stability across lighting conditions. Unlike many stones, Spinel did not rely on treatment to perform well. It was inherently consistent. What had once been mistaken for imitation began to feel intentional. At the same time, American collectors began re-examining stones that had been historically overshadowed. Value was no longer tied exclusively to familiarity. Accuracy mattered. Provenance mattered. Stones that represented correction, not repetition, gained interest. Spinel fit that shift precisely. Pause here for a moment. Before learning this, did you think of Spinel as a gemstone in its own right, or as a ruby lookalike? Just comment on or lookalike. Spinel's rise did not come from fashion cycles or sudden exposure. It came from reclassification. Once buyers understood that Spinel wasn't pretending to be something else, and never had been, its value framework changed. It wasn't competing with ruby. It wasn't replacing sapphire. It was standing independently for the first time. Today, Spinel occupies a respected position in the American gemstone market. It's appreciated for its performance, durability, and color integrity. Collectors evaluate it by structure and quality rather than comparison. Jewelers present it as a deliberate alternative, not a compromise. Spinel belongs in this ranking because its value did not emerge with discovery, nor with rarity alone. It emerged with correction. Only after time stripped away centuries of mislabeling did Spinel gain the space to be seen clearly. Spinel didn't change its identity. History finally stopped confusing it. And once that happened, Spinel stopped being a mistake and became a decision. Before today, did you see Spinel as its own gemstone or just a ruby lookalike? Comment own or lookalike. Ranked 5th. Alexandrite. The stone that meant little until science learned how to see it. In the 1960s, jewelers didn't know how to price Alexandrite, not because it lacked rarity, but because it refused to look the same twice. It changed color, dramatically. It behaved differently under different light, and because of that, many buyers didn't trust it. In the American market, Alexandrite was often treated as a curiosity rather than a cornerstone. It appeared in textbooks, specialty cases, and niche collections, admired for its unusual behavior, but rarely embraced as a stable long-term gemstone. Collectors hesitated. Jewelers struggled to explain it. Buyers assumed inconsistency meant uncertainty. Alexandrite wasn't dismissed because it lacked rarity. It was dismissed because its value depended on understanding context. Geologically, Alexandrite is a rare variety of chrysoberyl whose color change is caused by the way chromium absorbs light. Under daylight or fluorescent lighting, it appears greenish. Under incandescent or candlelight, it shifts toward red or purplish tones. That transformation is not a trick. It's a precise interaction between crystal chemistry and light source. For decades, that explanation didn't land. Before modern lighting became standardized, Alexandrite's behavior seemed unpredictable. The same stone could appear muted in one room and vivid in another. Without consistent conditions, buyers couldn't evaluate it reliably. What couldn't be evaluated couldn't be priced with confidence. Time changed the conditions. As lighting technology evolved and gemological testing became more precise, Alexandrite's color change stopped feeling mysterious and started feeling measurable. Laboratories developed clearer grading criteria. Collectors learned to evaluate strength of change, saturation, and clarity rather than expecting a single fixed appearance. What once felt unstable began to feel controlled. At the same time, supply realities became clearer. Fine natural Alexandrite was never abundant, but that fact was obscured for years by synthetic and imitation material. As education improved, the difference between true Alexandrite and substitutes became unmistakable. Alexandrite didn't become rarer, it became easier to recognize. Pause for a moment. When you first learned about Alexandrite, did the color change feel impressive or confusing? Comment impressive or confusing. Alexandrite's value didn't rise because of fashion or marketing. It rose because the environment around it matured. Once buyers understood how and why it behaved the way it did, the stone no longer felt inconsistent. It felt precise. Collectors began to see Alexandrite not as a novelty, but as a test of knowledge. Jewelers presented it with context instead of spectacle. Buyers accepted that its beauty was conditional, and that condition was part of its identity. Today, Alexandrite occupies a rare position in the American gemstone market. It is not chosen casually. It requires explanation, patience, and proper viewing. But for those who understand it, Alexandrite represents one of the clearest examples of value revealed through time rather than appearance. Alexandrite belongs in this ranking because its worth could not be recognized immediately. Without the right light, the right tools, and the right language, it simply didn't make sense. Time didn't change Alexandrite. Time changed the conditions required to understand it. And once that happened, Alexandrite stopped being a curiosity and became a benchmark. Did Alexandrite's color change originally feel impressive or confusing to you? Just one word is enough. Ranked 4th, Sapphire, non-blue. The colors America ignored until blue stopped being enough. For most buyers, sapphire meant blue and nothing else. Every other color existed in the same mineral, but outside the definition of value. In the American market, non-blue sapphires, yellow, green, pink, orange, and even colorless, lived in the shadow of their own name. They shared the same mineral identity, the same durability, and often the same geological quality. Yet they were treated as secondary, sometimes even inferior. Collectors focused on blue. Jewelers centered blue. Buyers learned to associate value with a single color. Non-blue sapphires weren't dismissed because they lacked quality. They were dismissed because they didn't fit the story America told itself about sapphire. Geologically, all sapphires are varieties of corundum. Their colors are caused by trace elements, iron, titanium, chromium, interacting within the crystal structure. From a technical standpoint, a yellow or pink sapphire is no less a sapphire than a blue one. For decades, that fact didn't matter. Market behavior reinforced the hierarchy. Blue sapphires carried historical symbolism, royal associations, and institutional recognition. Non-blue stones were often categorized as alternatives, attractive but optional. Without cultural anchoring, they remained undervalued. Time began to change that imbalance. As global supply shifted and traditional blue sapphire sources became more constrained, attention slowly widened. Collectors began looking beyond the expected. Jewelers started experimenting with color diversity. Buyers, especially in the American market, became more open to individuality over tradition. Non-blue sapphires didn't rise quickly. They rose selectively. Certain colors, once overlooked, began to gain recognition for their rarity and visual complexity. Yellow sapphires with balanced saturation, green sapphires with forest-like depth, and especially Peridot, the delicate blend of pink and orange that resisted easy categorization for decades. These stones were always there. They just weren't being seen. At the same time, gemological education improved. Buyers learned that durability, clarity, and structure mattered more than inherited color preference. The idea that blue alone defined value slowly weakened. Pause here for a moment. When you hear the word sapphire, do you still picture blue? Or has your definition expanded? Comment blue or expanded. Non-blue sapphires didn't become valuable because fashion changed. They became valuable because criteria changed. Once evaluation replaced assumption, these stones gained space to be judged on their own terms. Today, non-blue sapphires occupy a distinct and growing position in the American gemstone market. They are chosen deliberately, not as substitutes, but as statements of understanding. Collectors appreciate them for rarity rather than tradition. Jewelers present them as intentional alternatives, not compromises. What earns non-blue sapphires their place in this ranking is not how long they've existed, but how long it took for value to detach from expectation. For decades, these stones were filtered out by habit. Only when time loosened that habit did their worth become visible. Sapphire didn't change. America's definition of sapphire did. And once blue stopped being the only answer, value finally caught up with color. When you hear sapphire, do you still think blue, or has your definition expanded? Just comment blue or expanded. Ranked third, Paraíba tourmaline, the discovery that rewrote value after it was too late to ignore. Tourmaline was never supposed to shock the gemstone world. Then Paraíba appeared, and the scale had to be recalibrated. Colorful, yes. Versatile, certainly, but rarely extraordinary. In the American market, tourmaline lived comfortably in the middle, appreciated for variety, but seldom treated as a benchmark stone. It appeared in collections as accent color, not as a centerpiece. Buyers admired it, but few expected it to redefine anything. Then Paraíba appeared. Not gradually, not politely, but decisively. Discovered in the late 20th century, Paraíba tourmaline didn't fit into existing categories. Its neon-like blue and green hues behaved differently under light, appearing electrically alive rather than reflective. The color didn't sit on the surface. It seemed to glow from within. At first, the market didn't know what to do with it. Collectors questioned whether the color was natural. Jewelers struggled to explain it without exaggeration. Buyers assumed it was another short-lived curiosity. Paraíba wasn't dismissed because it lacked beauty. It was doubted because nothing before it prepared the market to value it correctly. Geologically, Paraíba tourmaline is defined by trace amounts of copper within its crystal structure, an element rarely present in tourmaline at that intensity. That copper creates a saturation and luminosity unlike anything previously seen in the gem world. But discovery alone doesn't create value. For years, Paraíba existed without a framework. There was no long history, no established grading language, no precedent for how it should be compared. Without time, there was no trust. Time arrived quickly and harshly. As production remained extremely limited and early deposits declined, the market realized Paraíba was not replicable at scale. Later finds in other regions expanded availability slightly, but they did not dilute the original impact. The color profile remained unmistakable. The supply remained constrained. Paraíba didn't grow rarer. The opportunity to misunderstand it disappeared. At the same time, gemological consensus formed. Laboratories confirmed the copper signature. Collectors learned to identify the glow rather than the hue. Evaluation shifted from skepticism to precision. Paraíba stopped being a question and became a reference point. Quick pause. When you first saw Paraíba tourmaline, did you think the color looked natural or too intense to be real? Comment natural or too intense. What makes Paraíba essential to this ranking is not just its rarity, but its timing. It arrived late in gemstone history, after systems were established, after hierarchies were fixed, and instead of fitting in, it forced the market to adjust. Tourmaline was never meant to sit beside the most elite stones. Paraíba made that assumption obsolete. Today, Paraíba tourmaline occupies a singular position in the American gemstone market. It is not compared casually. It is measured, documented, and evaluated independently. Collectors understand that its value is not derived from tradition, but from geological anomaly and confirmed scarcity. Paraíba didn't benefit from centuries of prestige. It created its own. It belongs at number 3 because it represents one of the clearest moments when time didn't merely reveal value. It accelerated it. The market didn't slowly warm to Paraíba. It corrected itself out of necessity. Paraíba didn't wait for acceptance. Time forced the market to catch up. And once it did, the rules were never the same. When you first saw Paraíba tourmaline, did the color feel natural or too intense to be real? Just comment one word. Ranked second, Tanzanite. The stone the world found late and understood even later. Tanzanite entered the world quietly. No ancient legends, no centuries of royal use, no inherited prestige. It appeared in the late 20th century, discovered in a single, narrow region of East Africa. In gemstone history, that made it feel young, almost unfinished. In the American market, that youth worked against it. Collectors were cautious. Jewelers leaned on explanation. Buyers admired the color, but hesitated to assign permanence. Tanzanite wasn't dismissed because it lacked beauty. It was questioned because it had no past to rely on. Geologically, Tanzanite is a variety of zoisite whose blue-violet color results from trace elements and heat exposure. Its defining tones are not uniform. They shift subtly between blue, violet, and gray, depending on orientation and light. That variability, combined with a relatively recent discovery, made early evaluation difficult. For years, Tanzanite lived between categories. It wasn't traditional enough to feel timeless. It wasn't rare enough, yet to feel irreplaceable. And without time, the market couldn't decide what it was meant to be. Time made that decision unavoidable. Unlike most gemstones, Tanzanite comes from one known commercial source. There is no global network of deposits, no alternate supply waiting to be developed. That reality didn't register immediately. Early production created the illusion of abundance, and the market priced it accordingly. Then production slowed. As mining conditions became more complex and output less predictable, the idea of endless supply collapsed. Collectors began to realize that Tanzanite was not expanding. It was concentrating. Quality material became harder to replace. Lower grades filled showcases, while fine stones quietly disappeared into long-term holdings. Tanzanite didn't become rarer overnight. The margin for mistake vanished. At the same time, American buyers matured. Instead of asking whether Tanzanite belonged beside older stones, they began asking whether its story was complete enough to stand on its own. Scarcity, once theoretical, became measurable. Provenance mattered. Documentation mattered. Understanding arrived late, but decisively. Pause here for a moment. When you first encountered Tanzanite, did it feel temporary or inevitable? Comment temporary or inevitable. Tanzanite's rise wasn't driven by hype or sudden fashion. It was driven by constraint. Once the market accepted that supply was finite and centralized, perception shifted. Tanzanite stopped being evaluated as a color and started being evaluated as a circumstance. It wasn't just beautiful, it was conditional. Today, Tanzanite occupies a unique position in the American gemstone market. It is no longer introduced as a novelty. It is framed as a moment, a material tied to a specific place, a limited window, and a generation that witnessed its emergence. Collectors approach it with caution and intention. Jewelers present it with context rather than promise. Buyers understand that Tanzanite's value is inseparable from time, not age, but timing. Tanzanite belongs at number 2 because its worth could not exist at discovery. It required the market to watch, wait, and accept limits. Only after the idea of replacement disappeared did Tanzanite's position solidify. Time didn't give Tanzanite history. Time gave it boundaries. And once those boundaries were clear, Tanzanite stopped being a possibility and became a certainty. When you first learned about Tanzanite, did it feel temporary or inevitable? Just comment one word. In first place, Moldavite. The stone time didn't create, but took centuries to understand. Moldavite was never meant to be jewelry. It wasn't shaped by Earth over time. It was created in a moment when time interrupted Earth itself. It was irregular, it wasn't faceted, and it didn't fit into any traditional jewelry category. In the American market, Moldavite existed on the margins, sold as a curiosity, a souvenir, or a conversation piece. It appeared in museum gift shops and small displays, often grouped with meteorites and oddities rather than evaluated stones. Collectors overlooked it. Jewelers avoided it. Buyers assumed its value was symbolic, not material. Moldavite didn't lack a story. It lacked permission. Geologically, Moldavite is a tektite formed by a meteorite impact approximately 15 million years ago. Extreme heat and pressure fused terrestrial material into a glassy substance, scattered across a narrow region of Central Europe. That origin made Moldavite fundamentally different from gemstones formed through crystallization. For decades, that difference worked against it. It wasn't rare in the way diamonds were rare. It wasn't durable in the way sapphires were durable, and it didn't conform to any grading system buyers recognize. So the market simplified it. Moldavite became interesting, which is often where value goes to stall. Time changed the conversation. As scientific understanding advanced, Moldavite's origin stopped sounding exotic and started sounding precise. Impact modeling confirmed its formation. Chemical signatures distinguished authentic material from glass imitations. What had once been folklore became measurable fact. At the same time, supply reality became impossible to ignore. Unlike gemstones that continue to form or can be mined in multiple regions, Moldavite exists only where it fell. There are no new deposits waiting to be discovered. No alternate sources to balance demand. What exists today is all that will ever exist. Moldavite didn't become rarer. The market finally understood that replacement was impossible. As collectors began separating tourist-grade pieces from collector-grade material, defined by structure, surface integrity, and provenance, Moldavite's value framework shifted. It was no longer sold as a novelty. It was evaluated as a finite geological event, a moment, not a mineral. Quick pause. When you first heard about Moldavite, did it sound like a curiosity or something serious? Comment curiosity or serious. Moldavite's rise was not driven by fashion or endorsement. It came from convergence. Science provided clarity. Collectors provided discipline. Time provided scarcity. Once those elements aligned, Moldavite stopped being debated and started being documented. Today, collector-grade Moldavite occupies a unique position in the American market. It is not worn casually. It is not purchased impulsively. It is authenticated, archived, and often removed from circulation entirely. Its value does not come from brilliance. It does not come from polish. It comes from finality. Moldavite belongs at number 1 because its worth could not exist at discovery. It required centuries of misunderstanding, decades of dismissal, and finally a market mature enough to recognize what it was never meant to be. Moldavite isn't a gemstone shaped by Earth over time. It's a record of time interrupting Earth. And once that was understood, Moldavite stopped being a souvenir and became an artifact. When you first learned about Moldavite, did it feel like a curiosity or something serious? Just comment one word. What this list really shows is simple. These gemstones didn't change. Time didn't make them better. Understanding did. Some were ignored because they felt ordinary. Some were dismissed because they didn't fit the rules of their time. And one, in particular, only became valuable when people realized it could never be replaced. Before you leave, one quick question. Which gemstone on this list surprised you the most? Just comment the name. If you value documentary storytelling that looks past trends and focuses on how time reshapes value, you're watching the right channel. This is Tops. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next countdown.